So we'll start off with introductions, walk through some questions that I'll ask, and then for the last 15 minutes, open it up to you all for some Q&A. But I thought, maybe it just makes most sense to start with introductions. I can go first really quickly, and then we can spend more time having these guys give their more interesting backgrounds. But I'm Seema, as Sasha mentioned. I'm a partner at A16Z. I sit on our early stage B2B investing team, so I do both B2B SaaS and B2B fintech. This topic is near and dear to my heart. I've written a lot about it, and it sits right at the intersection of the two things I invest in. I've been here for 5 years. Before that, I spent about a decade investing in software. A lot of that was also looking at fintech and financial services software. So again, topic I love and very excited to talk about with you guys tonight.
Hey, I'm Armstrong. Run biz dev and corp dev at Rippling for almost 2 years now. So all our partnerships, which are many, and we'll talk about partnerships that we have with these guys here tonight. All of our M&A activity and investments. Previously, was at Slack for 6 years, doing the same thing, building the ecosystem around that platform, which was a great experience and fantastic. And then prior to that, 8 years doing the same thing, building ecosystems around the platform at Salesforce. So basically, I've had 3 jobs, all within 2 uni stops for the last 15 years.
Hey, Siqi. I run a company called Runway.com, not the AI one, not the video one. It's a finance one. And the idea is to make finance understandable to everyone, including finance, so that you don't have a million spreadsheets, one for every department lying around. You can have a single source of truth. And we think what's required is a better product. Yes, we're funded by A16Z and Seema, actually. But unlike Seema, I have absolutely no experience in finance or B2B or SaaS. This is my first B2B SaaS finance company of any kind. Before this, I ran a company called Sandbox VR. I was briefly CEO. Before that, Chief Product Officer, which is what led to Runway when COVID hit. And the finance, the financials became really important. Before that, I ran product and growth at Postmates, so I was VP product growth there. They bought my second company, which I won't talk about. It's a mobile ads company. It was shut down by Congress. You can read about it later. Before that, I was head of product at a company called Zynga, which bought my first company, which was in social gaming. Before that, I was an engineer at JPL and majored in math. So yeah, that's my life story.
Hi, I'm Sasha. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Puzzle. And so I think the easiest and the fastest way to think about it as a founder is like if OpenAI and Stripe and QuickBooks had a baby, it would be called Puzzle. And it's built native to the things that we want as startup founders. Sometimes part of that is accounting, and sometimes part of that is finance and metrics and cash variance and compliance and tax. And all these things are kind of different solutions and different people and pretty manually intensive. And so the moment that you need to raise money and you're going to pitch Andreessen Horowitz and they ask you about your numbers and you don't know, guess what they do? They pass. Or you're like, hey, you know what I want to talk about and have a board meeting or send an investor update. And they're like, this chart doesn't match your other stuff. That's called reconciliation. A lot of this stuff can be done with software. And it was the frustration of scaling my first company to 100 million and second company to 300 million is having these debates where the loudest voice wins instead of having data win. And so I sort of think about founder intuition is the most powerful thing, and founder intuition masked with added with financial data makes that founder intuition even better. And so let's give everybody the best chance of building an enduring company.
Just to dig into a little of the background stories behind your companies, I think Siqi, you covered this already, but what was the sort of finance pain point that you'd seen before, or like what was it that you or Brad, in your case, that your founders were seeing that led to the company getting started?
So mine came ultimately from a comment that my annoying little brother made, which was, you have a software problem. And I, as a non-engineer, I was a math major, so like I can build models, but like I can't write software code. And I don't know if anybody has younger siblings, but the last thing you want to do is listen to them, and the last thing you want to do is admit that they're right. And so as I'm talking about how frustrated I am with my finance team, why do they need engineers? And like, why aren't they delivering these things that I care about? I want to know my ARR and my runway and my cash position and what changed. He's like, oh, you have a software problem. And I was like, my accounting team, whatever. Ultimately, I finally listened to him and realized, actually, accountants are really great people. They're like the experts in the financial health of a company, but they have really, really mediocre software that is built for a time when we took paper and we put it on the internet. But it's not native to like the things that we want. We want to use the best products in the market. I want to use Rippling, and I want to use Runway, and I want to use Ramp. And all of these things are like, QuickBooks kind of competes with them. Well, like, I don't want some bundled mediocre software. I want to use the best software in the market. I want my accounting software to tell me what I can and can't do. Like, it's there to help me build my business. So it was born out of frustration, and then a couple years of just stubbornness with my younger brother, and then finally I was like, all right, this is the right thing to do.
So for Runway, I was appointed CEO of Sandbox VR, I think, end of 2019. And Sandbox VR, for you who don't know, is a retail company where you go and buy tickets and go to malls and play with friends, like a movie theater. And the company was scaling pretty well, and we were raising a B, and then COVID hit, and our revenue went on zero. We had 400 employees, and I was the CEO, and we had to go to Andreessen, and they were triaging other companies, like everyone else, for emergency funding because COVID. And we were definitely on the bottom list. I wasn't in the room, but I am guessing we're on the bottom list given the retail. But anyway, we're working on CFO, and we were creating all of these scenarios and forecasts for how we're going to survive if COVID is 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. And it was miserable because we had all these spreadsheets, and there were errors, they wouldn't sync. End of the day, we hibernated the company. I laid myself off, entire executive team, 95% of the company, and the founder, Steve, took it, and now it's profitable at like 1,000 employees. It's an amazing company. At the time, it was pretty devastating. I wasn't sure how we were going to make it. But anyway, right after 30 minutes after layoff, I talked to our CFO, ex-CFO, and I said, there was something better we could have used here, right? Like, instead of Google Sheets, Figma's a thing now, Notion's a thing now. We have all these great products. There was something we could have done for finance, we just didn't use it. He's like, no, nothing with this. And then maybe you can finish the other half of the story, and then when you talk to Existing Z, or like, maybe someone should do something?
Yeah, no, and I think one of the things, I mean, both you're hearing Sasha and Siqi talk about this idea of like modern tools for finance and the lack of modern tools for finance. But interesting, yeah, I remember being on Zoom and seeing Siqi pitch. He may or may not have been sitting in the bathroom of his home to hike with his kids. Yes. But, you know, I think one of the things that actually we love to look for is founders who felt a pain point themselves firsthand. And so Siqi, even if he's not from the finance world, he had felt it firsthand, and he was building a tool for people like him as a founder, which was really interesting and appealing to us. And the rest is history. Brad, do you want to share anything?
I'll do my best channeling of Parker, which is pretty tough to do. But you really have this observation that fundamentally B2B software in SaaS is about employee data and the different things that you can do with that data and the different workflows that fall out from who an employee is in an organization and all the workflows around that. And I think that's a pretty interesting observation that has translated into a really massive company that's been really successful. And I look at the prior companies that I talked about, Salesforce, Slack, that I've been part of. It really at the end of the day, it's software that an employee uses and that has specific permissions and workflows around who they are. And basically, what Rippling is doing is saying that really is the fundamental kernel of truth that all this should be built around, and it should be done in one system that's kind of the master record for that, instead of 50 different systems that you're using to run a company. And so, whereas Rippling started in HR and payroll and benefits and these things, which are fundamentals. You want to start a company, you need employees, you need to manage them, you need to pay them, you need to do these things. I think it became pretty obvious within the first couple of years that finance is just another way of running a company, and a lot of the primitives that you see in financial software echo those that you see in HR software, because they're all based on the same employee record. So Rippling, I think, has just evolved to encompass more and more different types of software based on that fundamental observation that business software and managing employees is really around this employee record and this data, and that you can do a lot of different things with that. And once it's integrated and works well together, as opposed to 3 or 4 or 5, 50 systems, whatever it is that you're using, there's major advantage to that. And so, we partner with both of these companies here to extend the platform to a lot of things that we don't do. But fundamentally, we think finance software is really about employee management within the company.
Awesome. I think actually to that point around teams and the software that's being used by them, what do you guys think has changed about the finance teams that you guys are selling to, maybe over the last 5 years, and where maybe things are going?
I think they're smaller.
What way?
Well, it's in their size and their number of people, and I think that's a trend that you're likely to see. I mean, we did a third-party study that looked at the G&A departments of companies that use Rippling versus those that don't, and found that they have about half the number of G&A employees because there's so much automation that the software accomplishes for them. So I think in kind of this environment we've been in the last couple of years, companies aren't as growing as fast. G&A is obviously a cost center. The more we can do to automate and make those workers super productive and more valuable, the better, because they're seeing a similar thing.
And maybe, Brett, just to push a little further, in the G&A spend, like what are the roles that you're seeing companies like saying, okay, this is the first thing to go?
HR business partner, strategic finance analyst, roles like this that, is that really 3 people? Is that 2 people? Can one person do that if enough of the administrative work that they do is automated through software?
Yeah. So it sounds like, though, to push on that, it's like administrative work. And, one of the things we often spend time on is like, okay, the administrative work versus the more strategic work. I'm curious, Siqi, Sasha, in your experiences, like what types of roles are changing, and whether the work is shifting more towards strategic as we'd like to see, or are people actually employing more on the admin side?
I mean, the idea of strategic finance is not a new one, right? People have been talking about it for 15 years, and it's been a marketing slogan. So I think that expectation on finance has always been there, but I think the ability for finance to deliver on strategic impact has been extremely limited, and the reason why is like they spend a lot of time on administrative work. And so there's this huge disconnect between expectation and what finance can deliver. And I think a lot of this has to do with like what the tools actually do, right? So much of finance and being a finance professional has moved from, it's about controls, and it's about like having accurate books. That's table stakes. But now it's more about what are the strategic insights you can deliver to a CEO? Like, if I spend more on product versus engineering, on the marketing campaign versus our technical platform, what is the impact? And that is like far more of a strategic role, and that's still sort of being unlocked. And I think one of the things that motivates our existence is to solve that very problem so that you can actually have a strategic impact. But that's a very difficult thing to do, and we're not naive to how difficult it is. But that is changing, and expectation has shifted.
One of I think the challenges is accounting software is just really hard to build. It takes a long time, which is why it's been 38 years since there's been really a choice. Like, you don't think about, what do I do instead of QuickBooks? It's like, do I use QuickBooks or I don't use QuickBooks, and I'm uncompliant, and that's it. And so there hasn't really been an option. But what we're starting to see now, after sort of 5 years, is we have comparatively about 60 employees, 3,000 customers, growing in double digits month over month. And our accountant spends less than an hour closing our books across both accrual GAAP books, which they want, cash books, which is what I want. I want to see cash variance. I want to see my ARR. I want to see my burn. And I can understand all of these things in just a fraction of the time. Now, we're bigger than some companies. We're smaller than a lot of companies too. But the benefit is you're spending most of your time doing exception-based workflows, the stuff that software just can't solve yet, or the anomaly stuff. And that has 2 things. One, the tangible impact is accounting teams will look a lot different in a couple of years, just naturally as AI continues to progress and as we continue to gain more and more market share. But I think like the outcome of that comes in one of 3 ways. You get more time back. You still want a human because we all have personal liability for like our financials and our taxes. So you're always still going to want a CPA to sign off on your tax filings and before you like send off stuff to your investors. But their job can either get way more time back in their day, the same work, the same accuracy, plus all this extra stuff for less work. They can just make a higher margin They can charge us all the same amount of money, do less work. We get a better experience. So if we're paying X amount of money before, we'll pay the same amount, but we get a better product. That is an advantage. Or you take this like 6-year, highly trained, highly specialized person who is an expert in financial health, and you take this monotonous, boring fucking month, and you turn it into something that's actually interesting. Like, how many of us thought the conversation with the accountant should be, how do I make this better? Like, what's the truth that we then could go take to our finance software and make our business better? But instead, it's the same thing. Their whole life is planned every day for infinity. And like that is just not a great use of time. That's a place where software and AI can actually make a meaningful impact. So I think similar to when Excel came out, about half of bookkeeper jobs were lost. But it's about a million bookkeeper jobs lost. But 1.2 million accountant jobs were created, and analyst jobs were created that were higher paying and more interesting. And that was due to Excel. This next wave of AI will be, I think, a similar path where you will do less of the rote, boring, low-paying work. And the same people will just transition to more fulfilling, higher-paying jobs.
That is a perfect segue into the next question I was going to ask. So, a question we often get around AI is, okay, is AI replacing jobs? When are they coming for my job? In the context of finance teams, are they just taking away bookkeepers wholesale, or what's the impact? And I think one of the things we often say is actually, it's going to supercharge your team. Your team can do more versus thinking of it as zero sum, where your team is going to get halved or whatever the case may be. But I think onto that point of AI, how are you guys seeing AI being used? How are you guys using AI? And how receptive are finance teams to the use of AI, going back to this liability question and the feeling of black box? So curious if any of you guys have thoughts on that.
I tweet about AI a lot, so maybe I'll take it. So I think thinking about AI, at least in the midterm, as a force multiplier for human capital, I think is the right way to think about it. It will displace some jobs as the capabilities increase, but that's way down the line, maybe 1 or 2 model generations away. But in the short term, I think the right use of AI, if you look at the economically productive use of AI versus the sort of cool demos, the cool demos are all this is an AI employee and it's just going to do stuff, right? And it's not very good. It's not really reliable. It's hard to get actual economic productivity out of it. If you think about what is today the most economically productive use of AI, it's the GitHub Copilot. And that isn't the separate creature that you're talking to. You're doing work, and it's accelerating that work as you're doing it. It doesn't pretend to be a person. It just makes you faster. And I think that's the right way to think about a good use of AI today. So, we have AI integrated in Runway, and a lot of people don't even know it. For example, when you write a formula and you look at the details of that driver, it will actually explain in plain English how this formula is calculated, what the dependencies are, and it just looks like text, right? And so I think the right way to think about it is, if we're building a tool for thought at Runway, which is what we're building, I think that is a distinction between what Runway is as a product versus every other FP&A platform that exists. We help you think in the same way Excel thinks, and incumbent FP&A products don't do that. If we're a tool for thought, then AI is an amazing technology to help you think, to make things more understandable, to summarize very complex things and digest it and make it digestible. And so that's our philosophy on AI. And we have a whole page about this. It's called Ambient Intelligence on our webpage. But that's how we think about it.
So this isn't going to be finance specific, but I think it's in line with kind of what Siqi's talking about. So we recently released a product at Rippling called Talent Signal. And what it does is it goes through the work product, specifically of the first use case is engineers. So it goes through all the code written by an engineer in their first 90 days, and it compares the quality of their code to those that have come before them and categorize them based on whether they're someone who has been ultimately fired by the company, someone that has been okay at the company, or someone who has really progressed well at the company. And there's a little bit of a creep factor that people raise when they hear this in their first initiation. But it's as a manager, you have very limited insight into people's actual work product. You just don't have time. And so like in this instance, AI can be places that you can't and come back and tell you what it found, right? You're a manager, you have one-on-ones, what someone's telling you either makes sense or doesn't. You can kind of get signal from other people in the organization, like they think they're smart, they think they're not smart, but then you're kind of limited. You're probably not going to dig in and actually go in and look at their work product unless something goes horribly awry and you're forced to, right? Whereas this gives you that insight and lets that be another data point in your progression to ideally help someone who's struggling, usher someone out who's not a fit, but ultimately to make the workforce more productive in a way that you just couldn't do otherwise. So it's eyes and ears that you don't have because you're a human being. I think that's a pretty interesting use case for AI that, again, is helping you do your job, augmenting your capabilities as a manager for the benefit of a large organization.
I just want to say I love that use of it. I think it is a little creepy in terms of PR. But the idea that the use of AI allows you to be in places where you can't be. One of the things I really wanted to find a good company to do, and I know there's a bunch of companies, just found a really good one, is this idea of an AI chief of staff, where you can't be in every meeting, you can't read every document, follow every ticket at some point around 15 to 20 employees. And so having this AI chief of staff as a mission that lets you understand all the things that are happening in the company you don't even know about is incredibly interesting. I think what you're doing is a pretty good example of a similar strategy. So yeah, I actually want to try it out.
Cool. Yeah, let's do it. but for accountants and for bookkeepers, sure, someone needs to sign off, but can't a lot of that work be automated?
Yes, for sure. So it's when we first started playing around with AI, it's good at predicting words, and it's mediocre at doing calculations. It's getting better. So we actually spent, for better or for worse, so I haven't sat for you, raise your hand, another one of my investors in here. We refactored a bunch of stuff to make it easier to be readable by agents, to be able to do more automation internally. And so we have a bunch of agents running internally. We give users the ability to opt into it. And at first there was this kind of gimmick of tell me insights about my company. And people were like, oh, this is really cool one time, and then they don't give a shit afterwards. So who really cares? Do you really need to know where on your P&L your Twitter spend is? If you don't know where that is, spend 3 minutes learning how to read a P&L, and you'll find it pretty quickly. It's not that insightful. But accounting is a lot of specific arithmetic and a lot of crazy complicated rules, and that's words. And the two places where I think it's the most fun was one of my biggest fears in starting Puzzle, a lot fears, but one of my biggest ones was always the last mile. We started before OpenAI had sort of released it. Is there are some things that you just don't know by looking at your bank feed or your credit card feed. Wire in. What the heck was wire in? I went to Apple and I didn't upload my receipt. What is Apple? You know what you bought at Apple yesterday, but the computer doesn't know what you bought at Apple. You could have bought a bunch of stuff. Now you can ask people. You can have that human interaction real time. Because 18 months from now, I almost guarantee you're not going to remember what you bought at Apple yesterday. But today you know what you bought at Apple yesterday. And so that's a really fun application. And we play around a lot around sort of accuracy and integration. But there's the fun sort of general stat that we sort of learned a couple days ago. There's 256 ways to compliantly calculate monthly SaaS revenue in accordance with GAAP standards. 256 ways. The important thing is you got to pick one, and you got to stick with it, and you got to be consistent. And so before, you would have to write effectively a regex rule for every possible scenario that you can possibly think of. But I think along the theme of you can't be in every meeting, and you don't know when everything's happening. But AI can do a pretty good job of spotting and detecting inconsistent patterns or weird anomalies. So you write the most common use cases, and you hope it catches it all. And if you don't, well, shit, it's no worse than QuickBooks. And if it does, great, you get this hero moment in a faster time. So I think that's where it's kind of fun.
Yeah, to add on to that, I think what you said about the ability for AI to make good use of a raw transaction data is pretty limited. I think that's one of the sort of anti-patterns I've seen in early AI startups, where it's going to have this model, and it's going to do something magical to a spreadsheet, say. And I think the thing that we've learned is that in order for these models to be useful, context is incredibly important. And so, for example, in Runway, it's not just a spreadsheet, right? We have context about projects and marketing plans and roadmaps and these things. And with that context, now you can ask AI a question about, okay, what should we do? And if it didn't have project context or ticket context or roadmap context, it has no idea. It's just a bunch of numbers. And so one thing I would think about is how do you create a substrate to provide good context to the AI models? And a second question I would ask is, how do you not wait for the user to ask the bot a question? How do you surface it proactively as you're doing work so that you can accelerate it? So like proactiveness and context, I think, are the two most underutilized product directions. ChatGPT is interesting, but it's also the opposite of that, right? It doesn't know a whole lot about you, and it doesn't do anything until you talk to it. I think if you can reverse that, there's like an enormous field of opportunity in AI implementations.
It's interesting when pulling on one thread here is around sort of the discomfort around what AI can and can't do. We talked a little bit about the creep factor, or not wanting to say it's better than QuickBooks, or this goes back to also, I mean, I'm sure many of you guys have rode Waymo around San Francisco, right? The stats are actually better than cars, but there's still this visceral reaction from a bunch of people like, I don't want to get in a car with a robot driving it.
Until you get in the first time, and then you're like, I never want to get in with a human ever again.
As someone who is a total Waymo fan, I completely agree with that. But I think actually, one of the things that we are seeing is a lot of the interactions that you would be like, ugh, I don't know if I want AI doing it. Like phone calls, people actually end up interacting with an AI, and they're like, oh, this is actually not painful, and I get right to the point. And I think part of that is also there's a generational change, right, in the way this is operating. The last generation of robocalls really sucked, and you probably still get a lot of those on your phone. But imagine if it was actually tailored to you and you could efficiently get the conversation done and they understood you. Same thing with the last generation of analysis was probably kind of mediocre in the way it provided insights. But now I think we're actually getting supercharged and getting insights you care about, or hopefully we're going in that direction as opposed to just what was your Twitter spend? You're like, oh, cool, I can highlight this thing that nobody cares about. I guess one of the other things I just want to push on from what we were saying is what are some magic moments you've seen in terms of your customers that are like, oh wow, that was really cool and I didn't expect that out of your products?
From an AI standpoint?
Yeah, or just in general.
As much as it's really fun to talk about AI on the stage, actually, one of the biggest general wow moments was early on, and AI has only made it better, more accurate, but again, because people don't think about accounting software, they're like, whatever, I pay my bookkeeper, and they use QuickBooks, and that's whatever it is, and you start to have this problem. It literally takes 2.5 minutes to sign up for Puzzle, and you get your financials drafted instantly. Now, it's not perfect, depending upon what you use. If you use a Rippling and a Ramp and a Mercury, it's more accurate because they pass us a lot more data. It's about 98% accurate with no human intervention in 2.5 minutes. When you see that for the first time, again, I'm excited about accounting, so take a little pause. But you're like, why am I paying a human hundreds or thousands of dollars? Why are they spending a bunch of time when it's possible? And you just don't think about it. Why is this not possible? And that was just purely in with software. Now, better rules and more data and better training allow us to customize it and get it more accurate faster for you. But you're this moment where you're like, if this was possible, why didn't it exist before? And the answer is it's a software problem. It's also a business model problem. QuickBooks doesn't want it to because QuickBooks gets free distribution by your bookkeepers by helping them bill you more hours for the same work product. So they're not really incentivized to make this happen. So we can talk about it today stuff, but I was just this is wow moment. Sometimes it's software. There's so much talk, and there is a bunch of cool shit that AI can do, but sometimes software is just can be really great, or a different data model, or a different approach to how you view and think about it, not in a spreadsheet. It can also be pretty cool.
Yeah, some of this stuff is not magic, but it just is automation, and it's automated through software that when you see it, that's actually pretty cool. So these are a couple like fairly mundane examples, but like when you show a customer or partner this in a demo, they just love it. So one of the things about rippling is that you have a through line from the HR changes all the way through to finance and to like their corporate card. And so if you change someone's title, you change their role in the company, automatically their spend card has a different limit, and automatically their travel policy is different. So you can show the demo when they're a senior manager, and it's like, okay, they got like $1,000 they can spend, and then they're flying coach, and then you can hit a button in rippling and change them to a VP, and all of a sudden they have a massive limit, and they can fly international, all the rest of it. But people just see that like, oh, I didn't have to get a new card, I didn't have to do anything. Like someone just pressed the button, and then this person's ability to spend money in the world just like totally changed. So mundane, but actually like a really cool thing that people love.
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on again is this like back to modern software and the lack of modern software is like this connectivity that should have existed between these tools or like between these silos of different orgs that just finance used to live on an island, HR lived on a separate one, and like
it's literally just that process would be like a week-long thing where like the HR department filed a ticket and someone from IT did something in another system, and then like someone got mailed a new Amex card a week later and it felt really cool because this one was silver and the last one was gray. It's like this stuff is kind of done, and it should be a lot easier. It should be like that, and that's like a 2002 technology that is actually like prevalent now today and integrated well enough that it actually works.
I got two quick ones. One happened today, and every time this happens, makes me really happy. But we just saw a customer who was onboarding, and they have a page for their product team, and they wrote down their roadmap and have the roadmap itself integrated with the financials. And it's like, this is what we're going to build, and here's how it's going to impact things. And it has a logo, and it's really nice. And it's just like, that is not something that you would ever do in an incumbent FP&A platform. The other story is a company called ConvertKit, who's one of our customers, now Kit.com. And after they onboarded Runway, they did an all hands where they gave everyone access to Runway, which is possible because you can hide any particular column, like salaries. And they did a scavenger hunt inside Runway. They said, like, I want you to find out what is a driver of this margin, of this change. And because of our low-key use of AI, they were able to understand the model itself, how it works, and everyone was successful in the scavenger hunt. I saw it live. We were in the room. We were really nervous, and it worked.
I don't think I've ever heard of a software scavenger hunt, but it sounds fun.
Yeah, we have a recording of it. It was all hands, and the client's like, I want everyone to understand how the business works, and we're going to use Runway for it. And it was successful, which was, that was a magic moment. That was about a year ago.
Actually, I have a win from today. I hate to go after Siqi, but I was actually going through Puzzle, and I was beta testing a new feature, and I was like, how do you do this? And sort of the general thinking about accounting is like, the first 80% is really straightforward, but the second 80% is really hard. And I just used our intercom, AI chatbot. I was like, do I bother somebody on the team? I can Slack them directly. I was just like, how do you do this thing? And it solved it right in the thing. Because we spend a lot of time writing answers and solving everything and putting it so the AI can train. But I was like, how do you do this thing? And it's like, first do this, do this. Did I answer your question? Do you want to talk to a human? I was like, actually, that just answered my question. And I closed. And I was like, God, that was so rad.
Yep. And Fin by Intercom is actually one of the AI tools they launched as an incumbent company, which has been really cool to see as well. I know we're running out of time, and we gotta open up the floor to questions. So I don't know, Joshua, if you're gonna. Okay. Yes. Sorry. So.
Thank you, all the speakers. Very, very, very great conversation. I don't know if I'm the only one in the room that just spent a few hours without an accountant and then finished the tax filing for the last deadline, but it was really painful. On the other hand, what gives complication was because we're in the blockchain industry. So I'd like to ask, especially Seema, about future of CFO tools. What do you see blockchain play a role? And one question I have for myself is convertible notes a liability or equity? But blockchain is just making this 100 times more complicated. So when companies go to different jurisdictions, have different assets, hire people differently, sell products on a minute basis, what kind of future of this finance is, and then how do you see blockchain bring challenge and possibility here?
Do you want it back? Yeah, I feel like that question covered a lot. Candidly, I spend less time looking at blockchain. We have experts running our crypto fund that are deep on the blockchain side of things. But I do think, if you step back, right, whether it's blockchain or whatever the technology is, it's are you solving your end customers' problem? And so blockchain may be a way of doing that, but I actually think there's enough issues around filing your taxes, getting the bookkeeping right, that TradFi companies need to do, and workflow. And going back to Sasha's point, just the software needs to exist. And so I think your infrastructure choice has to be one that gives your customers comfort. And so if it ends up being blockchain in certain cases, I totally got that. But I think part of our conversation too is around AI, right? And I think making sure your customers in finance are comfortable with the underlying technology, I think is a big part of it too. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that.
I don't know what blockchain is.
Okay, 1, 2.
Hi, thanks a lot for the discussion. It's super helpful. So I'm curious about your perspective about AI agent, because today a lot of people talk about AI agent, and then it seems like that maybe AI agent can speak to the other AI agent in the ecosystem. So imagine that if my company, I use Rippling for payroll, Runway for financial analysis, Puzzle for accounting, and now maybe I have AI agent representative for Puzzle, and then talk to the AI agent in Rippling or in Runway. So I'm curious, how do you guys think about that quote? How does it affect your company or the development of software?
So, across these 3 platforms, we have integration, right? And so we have partnerships. The products talk to each other. They share data. So anything that, an agent that you enable in one product to do, will have access to that integration and that pipe to be able to make the requisite changes and do what it needs to do across the others. I do think there's a weird, chaotic, battle of the agents sort of scenario if we're not careful about how we do this. But fundamentally, if the companies are working together and the integration is right and you get the right permissions for the agents, that is derivative of kind of how we set up the integrations, we should be able to coordinate this stuff.
I don't think about agents very much right now. I think it's just early. If I'm running an AI company and building agents, I want to make it as good as possible and just let you do with reflection. But the reality is, for an operating company, agents are generally not productively useful today. They will get better. You can just replace a model in your generation and it's going to get better. But it's not quite there yet. I still think the right way to think about it for a company today operating is how do I accelerate existing work? How do I make things smarter? And it's a tool for thought rather than an agent that is independently making decisions. If you look at OpenAI, it's the 5 levels of AGI or whatever, right? I think level 3 is agents, and we're not quite there yet. But I think we're close. So it's worth keeping an eye on in the future, but I don't think it's that impactful today.
Also, what people are calling agents is a broad spectrum of
Sure.
what that term means today.
So each of you is building a tool that, Siqi said, helps people think, is integrating different pieces of business, and modernizing it. And for all the reasons that we think this is totally impactful, there's also a lot of ways that it could go wrong because you're trying to bring a lot of pieces together. So I wonder if you have any suggestions or lessons learned in terms of how to do that well, given all the risks of different kinds of teams you're working across when you're deploying, and also as an investor, what you look for when you're trying to evaluate a technology or a company tackling something like that.
I was trying to think if there's a natural bucket that falls into my worrying about how we think about playing the technology. And so this is an off-the-cuff, uninformed answer as a non-technical co-founder of a software company in B2B SaaS. And so I think about it a little bit in sort of 3 ways. Is can it make our like internal operations more efficient? Whether that's GitHub Copilot, our VP engineering came from GitHub, and she's a big fan, and our team is a big fan. Internal tools for operations, whether we build it or use Fin, which we like for helping just make sure if we keep everything training in a system, that helps internal tools for just exploration and anomaly detection, and then customer-facing like product enhancements. We spent about last summer, I think we somewhat redid a bunch of internal systems to allow for the world in which AI agents can reliably run and people can build on top of it. And the way that I think about it is you can't really tell what AI is doing or why it makes the decisions it does. But you know what? You can't tell why a human does the same things that they do either. And the only thing that matters at the end was like this weird thing that's like, it's really obvious, but I'm like not that smart, so like it wasn't obvious to me. But I was like, oh, your bookkeepers constantly make mistakes. And like, we can't have AI do it, AI is gonna make mistakes. It's like, all right, we call it hallucinations and it sounds really cool in the AI world, we just call it like human error or mistakes like in the human world. Either way, we want to avoid and minimize that. And so we actually refactored a lot of our internal systems to make it more readable and be a little bit more opinionated. So like NetSuite, for example, has 30 fields for revenue. You can use whichever one you want. You can label it however you want. It's really hard to like, well, use this one for a little bit, and use this one for a little bit, and use that one, and this is actually this type of revenue. And so we tried to make like a really enforced taxonomy in like how our systems are there and create an opinionated system. But again, like if you just create a fully opinionated system, people are going to be like, well, I don't want to do it that way. Great. So then we had to refactor the UX so that people could like opt in if they like the benefit, or they could choose not to. And we have a tagging system, what's done by a human, what comes directly from Rippling, what is AI change, what did a human change. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we can't decide what humans do and what AI does, or why they made those decisions, why they made the mistakes, or why they didn't. So we're just trying to like make it easier to detect problems and get to accuracy as fast as possible. That might be a little nuanced to like the accounting, bookkeeping world, but I'm excited for when that world happens. And we don't do services at all, and so I'm sort of bucketing agents into the world of services. Like we're just doing software, even though agents will be software as well. But whoever is responsible for doing that work, that's the liability of the client, and we're not accepting liability for like the final sign-off. So if you have an agent do it, and you want to build and train an agent on top of our system, great, we will help you, we'll build it with you, but like you have to do that. And we actually have a couple big firms that are like exploring building agents on top of us, and we're like, you do that, you accept liability, whether you have a human or you have AI, it's your liability, go for it. We'll help you enable it and make it as accurate as possible, but we're not accepting responsibility for the accuracy and the outcomes.
Are you asking about like some learnings from like the building of the product or deploying the product?
I think about deploying in a way that works across so many different stakeholder type teams or users in an organization.
Got it. Yeah, we have that exact problem in that we never thought of Runway as a finance product or a finance company. We always thought of it as like this a whole company operation. And we kind of learned the hard way that you have to start somewhere. You have to have a wedge, and a very, very specific wedge. And our wedge is finance, because they are the economic buyer, they are the owner of the model, they have real pains, and so we have to discover those pains. And our strategy is, like I think we have different slogans, but one of them is winner stretch. And so if we have that core, how do we stretch to other functions, other sectors, types of companies, and stages of companies? But we have a very well-defined core, and that core is in the middle market for the finance team. That's our starting point. Our sales collateral, if you go to our website, it looks like finance. But we have a very clear roadmap that says in the next 6 to 12 months, we should be able to enter into a sales org first, or engineering org that has like planning problems. But that would be my recommendation. It's incredibly important to be very specific as a starting point.
Yeah, I think what complements that is permissions. And this is like a fairly mundane topic in enterprise software, but actually incredibly important. So if you provision your Runway users through Rippling, we will tell Runway what permissions to give them, and therefore what data the user has. So if Siqi sends around a model of the financial plan that people 3 levels down can't see what the executive team is making, super, super important. right? How much burn is coming from the different departments? So I think thinking about that from a permissions first standpoint can really allow like more proliferation of information, which I think is what you guys are going for, that has existed before. More stakeholders in the company become strategic because they have that broader purview, but they're not tripping all over each other's sensitive data and causing mayhem in the company.
That's actually a super good point, because one of the things we're inspired by is like early Facebook. Zuck had this observation that MySpace let everyone see everything, right? But the more control that was fine-grained that they gave people on Facebook, the more people ended up sharing. And so there's this like stereotype of finance people don't want to share and don't want to give information. But if you look at the structure technically of a spreadsheet or Google Sheets, all calculations are actually done on the front end, including Google Sheets. So technically you cannot share a spreadsheet without exposing all data on the spreadsheet. It's architected that way. And so architecting for permissions, designing it correctly, is how you get more people involved outside the company. I think that was like spot on.
We have 3 more quick questions.
I'm curious where you see the evolution of like the B2B business model, and this idea of just paying like this static per seat pricing or for some set of features feels very obsolete. And Parker at Zenefits really brought this idea of giving away software for free and finding like other monetization points. And how do you think about pricing your software? How do you think about the future of that, and where's that all going in your perspectives?
I mean, there's a lot of talk about this out there right now in terms of per user pricing being old school and imprecise, and we need to move to more consumption-based models. I mean, works really well for infrastructure. For application software, it's really, really tough. It's really, really tough to ascribe value on a per user basis, because you have some users who use it every single day, some who use it every now and again, are the ones who use it every day getting a lot more value and therefore should be paid for it. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that once every 2 week view is actually super valuable. I mean, a lot of companies for years have done like portal users or limited use licenses for like those use cases. But I think that like per user pricing, as rough as it is probably here to stay. I think it's just really difficult to equate value based on logins and buttons pushed. And I think, there's ROI calculators that are sales tools. We know that those are mostly just sales tools. And so I think you're going to end up with kind of where we are being kind of the longer term thing that application software uses. You guys may totally differ, but that's what I've seen.
I think there's a whole like trend around this idea of freemium and going in that direction. But as everyone here knows, like freemium is like an on-ramp to paid customers versus it being standalone. And yes, I think the cost of developing software is coming down. But people pay for things that they want. And so yes, maybe in the longer term, I think I don't think the way big pricing might change. I think pricing is getting pressure on it. But I think, these things come in cycles too, right? Where there's a flood of new tech, it consolidates, I think, they're bundling and unbundling is another thing, right? People pay for convenience, etc. And so I don't think we're at that stage yet where pricing is getting overhauled. And the other piece I'd also just say is every company gets pricing wrong and goes back to the drawing board every 2 years. Part of it's a stage thing, part of it's oh, we didn't do this right. There's nothing there's no perfect way to do pricing. And so I almost think of pricing as going to be more an outcome of what we end up seeing happening as the trends. But I do think there's value to software that people will continue to pay for.
I also think it really depends on what you're doing and what it's used for. I think that Slack, I was there for 6 years. It's probably the most successful example of a bottom-up freemium motion in enterprise SaaS. It was communication, and people could adopt it without the higher-ups buying into some ROI stories. People liked to use it, so they did it, and then it grew. Totally on the opposite spectrum from Rippling, which is really functional software that someone who makes a very intentional decision to roll out to perform a functional purpose in their organization. And they're a buyer, they're going to pay on day one, and you want them to pay on day one because if they casually adopt it, it's probably not going to be a long-lasting thing. So it really just depends on the category.
Sasha, you mentioned earlier this example of someone buys something at Apple, doesn't upload a receipt, and then how do you know what they bought? And obviously AI could make guesses, it can use a lot of signals, it can take a lot of clues, but if that information really only exists in that person's head, there's no way to really definitively know. And so I think one thing that we've seen with our customers, is just around kind of misconceptions of exactly what AI can do. Of it can't read your mind, it can get pretty damn close, but it can't necessarily get all the way there. So for you guys, like, what are you seeing as the biggest misconceptions from your customers about the capabilities and kind of power of AI within your systems?
I was going in a different direction in my brain as I was trying to process the answer in real time. I think one of the things that we learned, I'll get to maybe the answer, I probably won't answer it, well, the answer to the question that I do have an answer for, is most people who aren't accountants believe that accounting can just be solved with software, and it's like really easy. Because as consumers, we categorize stuff. Like, we think of accounting as mint.com, but business accounting is like way more complicated than mint.com. That's why there's a 38-year-old incumbent that still has 85% market share. And so one of the things that we did was actually expose all of the steps that an accountant does. Because the other thing that we do, aside from not knowing, is we really devalue human labor in San Francisco, especially as tech startups. Why can a human? That software should be doing that as well. So here's just sort of exposed, just here's all the stuff that you need to do to make sure that your books are really accurate. And here's all of the anomalies and stuff you need to do. And then it sort of triggered, oh my God, this is actually harder than I thought. I should hire an accountant to do this. And then we had to go find a whole bunch of accountants to come use our platform, and that was something. So I don't think that answered your question, but it was more effective than the answer.
Okay, the last one. What are the most effective sales strategies you use, and did anybody have an experience with growth hacking? For example, you found this pain point and you found an approach that boosted your sales.
We had a website go viral about a year ago, and it was just a maximalist website, and we didn't intend it for it, and that dramatic, I think, probably got $1 million ARR from that one tweet, from just a tweet, and the tweet was literally, hey, new website, new role, check out Runway.com. Literally, that was the tweet, and the people on Twitter went nuts over it. So, the lesson I take from that is when you do something new, and we really try to do something new with that site and brand, and people talk about it, we spend a lot of effort in it. But my belief is that when you do anything, whether it's marketing or product, if you can do it meaningfully better and push forward the state of the art, it's not a 10% better or 20% better thing. It is literally that was 10x, 100x what we ever thought a new website would give us. And so that's my takeaway. It's a lot of things that people do, I think, are forms of cargo culting. Why do enterprise B2B websites all look the same with people shaking hands and stock photographs? It's not because I think it converts the best. It's because it's what everyone else does. And so being really calculated and willing to take a risk and doing something new, I think when it works, it really works.
Sasha, do you want to add something? I'm looking at your face and I'm not sure.
I don't think I have anything really cool and exciting. I was just in there listening in awe to Siqi, but I don't have his Twitter following or his Twitter capabilities.
Sasha and Siqi both have great